Welcome, everybody. We're going to get started here, and I just want to thank everybody for coming back to committee on this late hour this evening. We'll try and get things moving. I do have a bit of a preamble here that you'll have to bear with me. Welcome to today's meeting on Bill C-81, an act to ensure a barrier-free Canada. The objective of today's meeting is to continue the committee's thorough review of the bill. I would like to take a moment to remind both those participating in the proceedings as well as those observing the proceedings of the committee in person and on video that the committee adopted a motion on September 18th, which included instructions for the clerk to explore options to allow for the full participation of all witnesses and members of the public on this study. As a result, the committee has made arrangements to make all meetings in relation to the study of Bill C-81 as accessible as possible in a variety of ways. This includes providing sign language interpretation and near real-time closed captioning in the room. Please note that both American Sign Language and Quebec Sign Language are being offered to those in our audience. For those who would like to watch the American Sign Language interpretation, please sit in the benches to my left. For those who would like to watch the Quebec Sign Language interpretation, please sit in the benches to my right. In addition, please note that the first two rows of benches have been reserved for those who wish to avail themselves of these interpretation services. Screens displaying the near real-time closed captioning have also been set up. With the English, again, text to my left and the French text to my right. The sign language interpreters in the room are also being video recorded for the eventual broadcast of the meeting on Parleview via the committee's website. In light of these arrangements, the committee would ask if you need to leave the room during the meeting, please do not walk in front of the sign language interpreters. Instead, please use the extremities of the room. In addition, we would ask that those in the room remain seated as much as possible during the meeting so that everyone in the audience can clearly see the sign language interpretation. Finally, if a member of the audience requires assistance at any time, please notify a member of the staff or the committee clerk. I will also ask not just the witnesses who will be presenting today, but also remind my colleagues that as a result of the interpretation and the unique translation with sign language, that we keep our questions and answers at a pace that is not too fast. If I feel you are going too fast, or if the folks wave at saying you're going too fast, I may interrupt you, so I apologize in advance, but we want to make sure that everybody's message, questions and answers today are being heard in its entirety. So that's the end of my preamble, so thank you for that. I'd like to welcome the witnesses here this evening. As a individual, appearing as an individual, and I apologize in advance if I get this name wrong, Marie Bontrogiani? Butriani,
Close enough.
okay, got it. Dean, Chang School, Ryerson University. Welcome.
Thank you.
From Barrier Free Manitoba, we have Patrick Faulkner, Consultant Steering Committee. Welcome.
Thank you.
From the British Columbia Aboriginal Network on Disability Society, we have Neil Belanger, Executive Director. Welcome. And from Confédération des Organismes de Personnes Handicapées du Québec, we have Monique Baudouin, Administrator, Board of Directors, and Camille Deforge, Records Manager. Welcome to both of you. And from the Federal Accessibility Legislation Alliance, we have Bill Adair, Executive Director, and Jane Arkell, Project Director. Welcome to everyone. This is a big panel, so we're going to get started right away. We're going to start with Marie. The next, are we doing 7 minutes or 5? 7 minutes? Next 7 minutes are all yours.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Good evening. My name is Marie Buntriani, and I'm Dean of the G. Raymond Chang School of Continuing Education at Ryerson University. I would like to thank the Standing Committee for inviting me here to comment on Bill C-81. I would also like to congratulate Minister Qualtrough and the Standing Committee on the excellent progress made to date on the bill. I believe that most Canadians would agree that national accessibility legislation is a matter of equality and human rights. It was my distinct pleasure to serve as Cabinet Minister in the Legislature of Ontario from 2003 to 2007. The highlight of my tenure as Minister came in June 2005 when the Accessibility for Ontarians with Disabilities Act, or AODA, received royal assent and came into force. The bill was voted in unanimously in the Ontario Legislature. That doesn't happen very often. I have since had the opportunity to share my experiences developing the legislation and advising representatives from public and private organizations in Japan, Ukraine, and New Zealand. My team and I learned some very important lessons while we were writing the AODA. I'm pleased to share some of these lessons with the committee this evening in the hopes that they may help inform Bill C-81. When I first began university at the University of Waterloo in 1975, co-op placements at that university were limited for women on account that some of the engineering firms did not have female washrooms, and when asked why, it wasn't worth the expense. Can you imagine now our daughters being told anything like that? This memory of a less equitable time helped inform our mantra towards an accessible Ontario. I thought to myself, imagine in 30 years from now, people will say there was a time in Ontario only 30 years ago that people complained about the price of a ramp for wheelchairs, the cost of making a washroom accessible, or having to hire people with disabilities. Following meetings with disability community members and representatives from businesses, we found that they agreed that Ontario's businesses should be accessible. However, business owners were unaware of what a difference a few accommodations could have on their bottom line. During one of these meetings, one of the representatives from business said, "Minister, as a businessman, you are scaring me. But as a father of a daughter with a disability, you are not moving fast enough." This father's heartfelt sentiment helped inspire my determination to push forward. It also captured the challenge. During the consultation phase, we studied Great Britain's Disability Discrimination Act and were taught 3 critical lessons. We would need a clear deadline for an accessible Ontario. There would need to be regulations established through which to enforce the law. And public education would be key for creating awareness about the bill. When we set the 2025 deadline for an accessible Ontario, many criticized that the timeline was too long. However, it gave us time to ensure that we were getting it right. The government is meant to set a positive example for its constituents. Therefore, I support the fact that Bill C-81 is focused on enforcing accessibility in areas that the federal government can regulate. I am hopeful that other Canadian businesses will follow suit. However, I would like to urge the government and the committee to consider setting a firm deadline for a barrier-free Canada. It has been over 13 years since the AODA came into law, and Ontario still has a lot of work to do to reach its goal of becoming a fully accessible province. Just last week, the Ontario government partially lifted the freeze they imposed in June on the AODA Standards Development Committees. The Employment Standards Development Committee can now resume their work recommending revisions to the AODA's Employment Accessibility Standard. Premier Doug Ford also appointed a Minister of Seniors and Accessibility, which I think is a promising step towards promoting compliance with the legislation. I will be meeting with that minister soon. As identified in Bill C-81, I believe that the appointment of an Accessibility Commissioner, a Canadian Accessibility Standards Development Organization, and a Chief Accessibility Officer is an excellent direction for enforcing compliance. I was recently honored, as I have been twice before, to participate in the third review of the AODA. This year's review was led by the Honorable David C. Onley. Some of my feedback could be helpful here. One of my most pressing recommendations for the AODA is for greater emphasis on web accessibility. At the Chang School, we believe that unlocking accessibility in online environments is an important step towards facilitating equal access and opportunities for people with disabilities. Through collaboration with the Government of Ontario's Enabling Change program, the Chang School is currently developing 5 accessibility courses to help professionals, both in Ontario and anywhere, quite frankly, to learn how to develop and design accessible websites and web content. These are MOOCs. In other words, they're free for anyone who wishes to take them, and they have been very successful. Most free courses have a very huge dropout rate. This one doesn't. It's very successful, these modules. And we're looking to unveil a new website next year which is fully accessible. Our research also identifies a province-wide gap related to accessibility in the post-secondary education market. In order to reduce the 16% employment rate among Ontarians with disabilities, we believe that revisions to the AODA need to champion accessible technological innovation and advancement, as well as post-secondary educational offerings that promote accessible and inclusive environments. I believe this can be generalized across the country. Last year, the Chang School partnered with Ryerson's Digital Media Zone to launch the Accessibility Project. This project awarded $25,000 and funded 17 projects for students to develop apps and other technological processes, wearable technologies to remove barriers faced by people with disabilities and aging populations. And I'm proud to say that many of those awarded these grants were people with disabilities themselves and are developing incredible products. We were also recently pleased to collaborate with the CNIB to offer 2 courses in our certificate in entrepreneurship and small business to people living with visual impairment. And we're still learning. Even though our courses are accessible, enrollment wasn't and the books were not, so we had to scramble. Even though we thought we were the experts of the school, we still have a lot to learn. We similarly introduced a new Leadership in Accessibility and Inclusion program this past September. I believe that these examples help clearly demonstrate that partnership and collaboration are critical for realizing a barrier-free Canada. In technology in particular, we can close the gap, the unemployment gap between people with disabilities and people without. We can't really be employed without knowing technology today. It is a major barrier for many. In closing, I would like to encourage the Standing Committee to advocate for an appropriate budget for public education on Bill C-81. I believe that awareness is crucial for ensuring compliance with the legislation. I still get people saying to me, what is the AODA? There will most certainly be pushback, but I urge you to push forward. Again, I thank the Standing Committee for having invited me here. It is an honor. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now from Barrier Free Manitoba, Patrick Faulkner, Consultant Steering Committee. Next 7 minutes are all yours.
Good evening. Thank you, Mr. Chair, Vice Chairs and members for the invitation to present. My name is Patrick Faulkner. I'm here to speak on behalf of Barrier Free Manitoba and to express our strong support for the calls for significant amendments to Bill C-81 as outlined in briefs by the AODA Alliance dated September 27, 2018, and the Arch Disability Law Centre brief dated October 1st, 2018. As a matter of introduction, Barrier Free Manitoba is the cross-disability, non-partisan community initiative that has worked over the last decade on provincial accessibility rights legislation in Manitoba. Our support for both the Alliance and the Arch briefs is firmly rooted in the experience we have gained through those 10 years. Our story is the story of both hope and disappointment. Hope in the Accessibility for Manitobans Act, or what's called the AMA, our provincial legislation, promised that major progress would be made towards achieving full accessibility by 2023. Enacted and proclaimed in 2013, that set the stage for a decade of sure and steady progress. Hope in that the AMA included language, deliverables, and accountability measures that created clear obligations for government. Hope in that the AMA was passed by a unanimous, all-party, all-member vote at the Legislative Assembly. And finally, hope in that each major political party recommitted themselves to the full and timely implementation of the AMA in the 2016 general provincial election. But that's pretty much where the hope ends and the disappointment begins. We're now halfway through the promised decade of progress. Only one of 5 promised accessibility standards has been developed. There's still no compliance framework that's been established. Government has only rarely met its own timelines for obligations under the Act, and implementation efforts continue to be substantially under-resourced and way behind any reasonable schedule. Getting even this far has taken incredible efforts on our diverse and efforts on the part of our diverse and under-resourced disability communities. We are gravely concerned that Bill C-81 does not only replicate the AMA's weakness, but it actually compounds them. The bill does not include a clear goal of a barrier-free Canada or a date by which to achieve this. The bill uses permissive languages rather than prescriptive language. It enables, it does not require. The bill creates a likelihood of multiple accessibility requirements covering similar types of barriers. It also establishes a diffused and fragmented approach to standard development, compliance, and adjudication. The bill lodges responsibility for real progress with the government of the day, not the Parliament. Finally, the bill is extremely convoluted. We believe that Bill C-81 as it stands will create confusion for the public, obligated organizations, and Canadians with disabilities alike. It will result in more chasing of tails than forward progress. While representing a commendable effort with honorable intentions, we are concerned the bill is deeply flawed. Based on our experience, a decade of experience, and our careful review, BFM strongly supports the recommendations for significant amendments in the 2 briefs I mentioned by the AOD Alliance and the Arch Disability Law Center. We would like to respectfully add a word of caution. You may be thinking that political parties at the federal level are different than those at the provincial level, or that your party is a different one. Perhaps you're thinking that the federal government is a different and a more responsible order of government than our provinces. You may be thinking that types of amendments called for by the Alliance and Arch are excessive. Our hard-won experience over the last decade suggests otherwise. Bill C-81 presents a historic and long overdue opportunity, the opportunity of a generation. We beseech you not to squander it. In the brief time that I have remaining, I'd like to highlight 2 additional areas of concern. First, it is shocking to us that Bill C-81 does not incorporate any special measures to act on the federal government's constitutional, fiduciary, or special responsibilities in relation to Indigenous people with disabilities. Disability rates among Indigenous people are roughly 2 to 3 times higher than for the general population. Indigenous people are also among the Canadians who face the most severe barriers to accessibility. Both the higher rates and the severity of the barriers faced by Indigenous people are the direct result of government policies that reflect a shameful past and that continue into the present. Second, we are concerned that there's no clear reference to the National Building Code of Canada in Bill C-81. The National Building Code is not only applicable in areas of federal jurisdiction, it also plays a profound role in shaping the building codes that are developed and adopted by each Canadian province. At both the federal and provincial levels, the building codes and the current limited levels of accessibility provided for result in costly and preventable barriers being perpetuated and newly created every day in built environments across Canada. It seems likely that the responsibility for developing strong and effective accessibility standards related to the building code is meant to fall under the purview of the proposed Canadian Accessible Standards Development Organization, or CASDO. However, this remains unclear, and we believe that explicit reference needs to be added to Bill C-81 or to be clarified as part of the committee's review of this bill. Thank you for your time and your attention. I look forward to our further discussions this evening. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. Now from British Columbia Aboriginal Network on Disability Society, Neil Belanger, Executive Director. 7 minutes, sir.
Thank you. Good evening. Before I begin, I'd like to acknowledge and thank the Algonquin people whose territories we are meeting today. Excuse me. I would also like to thank the committee for this invitation and opportunity to speak on Bill C-81. My name is Neil Belanger, and I am the Executive Director of the British Columbia Aboriginal Network on Disability Society, an Indigenous organization providing disability-related services to Indigenous individuals and families residing in both First Nation and non-First Nations communities. Excuse me.
It's okay. Slow down as well a little bit for me.
Oh, sorry.
Please.
Okay.
Thank you.
Our organization is very pleased that the government has introduced Bill C-81 to ensure a barrier-free Canada, which has the great potential to make positive change in the lives of many. Over the past 2 years, we have had the opportunity to engage First Nations communities across Canada in relation to the accessibility legislation, as well as work with our partners at the Assembly of First Nations, the National Native Women's Association, and the Federal Accessibility Legislation Alliance in relation to the bill and next steps. From our work with our partners, a number of recommendations have been developed, many of which have been already presented to the committee. I would like to reiterate a few of these priorities from our organization's perspective. Number one, recognition of ASL, LSQ, and Indigenous Sign Language as the official language of the deaf. We believe this is not only an important cultural recognition, but also serves as a mechanism to promote accessibility across the nation. Number two, ensure that the CASDO board and all subsequent committees are composed at a minimum of at least 2/3 representation of persons living with a disability, including Indigenous peoples living with disabilities. This is necessary to ensure a broad level of insight and expertise is brought to the board and committees, and I would refer to the example of the Fellow Working Group, which is here today, which brought together a diverse range of individuals and groups within the disability sector, and through our work together, not only have we collaboratively made recommendations in relation to Bill C-81, but it has provided us an opportunity to learn about each other and the barriers and priorities each of our groups deal with on a daily basis. This has strengthened us as a sector, and it would do the same for the CASDO board and subsequent committees. Slow down. I got to slow down. Point number three, timelines must be established. As with our partners, we're recommending a 5-year timeline to implementation. And finally, our last point, the absence of any reference to Canada's 634 First Nations communities under the legislation. From previous testimony to the committee, it has been noted that there's a lack of clarity as to how Bill C-81 will impact Canada's First Nations communities. Indigenous peoples of Canada experience a rate of disability approximately twice that of the non-Indigenous population. As well, persons living in poverty are more likely to become disabled than those who do not. Many First Nations in Canada have a median income below the poverty line. Understanding this, as an organization, we assume that a priority, if not the priority, under the new federal accessibility legislation would be addressing the barriers within Canada's First Nations communities where people live, go to school, work, get married, have families, and grow old, many of whom live with disabilities. In December of 2017, the Assembly of First Nations passed a resolution requesting the government to support the creation of a distinct First Nations accessibility legislation. Since the passing of the AFN resolution, the government has stated its commitment to engage in a nation-to-nation dialogue to determine how Bill C-81 will be applicable to Canada's First Nations communities in its entirety, portions thereof, or not at all. It is our understanding that this nation-to-nation process has not yet commenced. The position of our organization is clear. Regardless of a distinct First Nations legislation or the legislation as currently proposed under Bill C-81, the government of Canada must ensure that substantial and adequate resources are committed and ongoing to ensure that all of Canada's First Nations communities have the resources necessary to address the barriers facing their memberships living with a disability, as outlined in the principles of Bill C-81. Without this provision, a barrier-free Canada will never be achieved. Thank you for this opportunity, and sorry for speaking so fast.
That's okay. Now, up next, we have from Confédération des organismes de personnes handicapées du Québec. We are joined by Baudouin, Administrator, Board of Directors, and Camille Desforges, Records Manager.
Good evening. My presentation will be in French. So first of all, I'd like to thank the committee for inviting COFAN to make a presentation with respect to C-81. What is COFAN? It's a provincial organization that brings together 50 or so members with visual, auditory, or motor disabilities. So we have associations that are regional in nature. We have also a few local organizations. COFAN works on a variety of issues in order to promote the inclusion of people in Quebec of the disabled so that they can participate fully in Quebec society. We also work with the federal government on a variety of issues. We're a member of CCD. So when it comes to C-81, I'll let my colleague Camille talk about the act, an act that we have examined closely. So good evening. I would like to quote a Quebec person who said that legislation was introduced in Quebec 40 years ago. Ideally, as a fair and enlightened society wouldn't even need to have legislation that would enable disabled people to have access to the same services as the general public. So we have to, therefore, talk about what is disability. 40 years later, we're still dealing with the same issues. The government has to develop a concept which we have referred to as disabled responsibility. We can draw a parallel with a whole concept of social responsibility. The federal government must bear in mind that a disability has to be looked at when looking at all policies. We have to respect the jurisdictions of provinces and the private sector and provinces. When we're talking about the primacy of human rights, this must prevail. We need to have a clause on social integration. Companies that provide accessible goods and show that they have a high level of or high number of people with disabilities working for them should be given an advantage. The government must go beyond economics, and it must look at inclusive society. We also have to look at the federal leveraging for funding that support both public and private agencies. In order to ensure sustainable development, all transfers of money must be governed by the Act with accessibility criteria that are very specific. We could broaden this aspect and look at various other international agreements. The scope must include all procurement aspects of the federal government and its spending power and all intergovernmental transfers. We don't know when this bill will come into effect, but we think that it would be very important to say that the Canadian Standards Association, the CSE, should be taken into account, and we have to create and operationalize the measures put forward by the Canadian Accessibility Standards Development Organization. Although imperfect, CSA standards are a threshold, a minimum threshold. The WCAG standards should also be adopted to enable us to attain a AA level for websites and apps. We need the CASDO can then come up with its own standards and adjust standards already set by SCA. We feel that the House of Commons should be responsible for this, and we feel that we should look at the role of the Commissioner of Sustainable Development and compare that to what's expected of the Commissioner of Accessibility. Our brief might be somewhat awkward. We were able to really flesh out all of our ideas, but we do understand that there are various agreements between the federal government and provincial governments. We're prepared to cooperate with the government. We need to develop a real reflex about the disability responsibility. Thank you very much.
And now we are hearing from the Federal Accessibility Legislation Alliance. We're joined by Bill Adair, Executive Director, and Jane Arkell, Project Director. The next 7 minutes are all yours.
Great, thank you very much. Firstly, I too would like to recognize that we are on the traditional territory of the Algonquin. My name is Jane Arkell. In addition to being Project Director of the Federal Accessibility Legislation Alliance, I'm also Executive Director of the Active Living Alliance for Canadians with a Disability. And the Alliance is a member organization of FALA. I'm here with my colleague today, Bill Adair, who's Executive Director of Spinal Cord Injury Canada. SCI Canada leads the Federal Accessibility Legislation Alliance. We are a partnership of 56 organizations that include not only disability-related organizations, but other partners that represent people with disabilities in sectors such as the Far North, First Nations, research, employment, older adults, education, policy, and youth. We have joined together to help develop a strong and effective Accessible Canada Act. We have also been collaborating with other organizations doing similar work, like my friend Neil, and recognize that there is a high degree of agreement on areas of improving Bill C-81. Thank you so much for inviting us to share the recommendations that we have. Canada is taking a bold step forward with this proposed legislation. We've waited for legislation like this for a very, very long time. Truthfully, this gives our community hope. We are finally able to say, my Canada includes me. FALA's position is clear. We want Bill C-81 to be strengthened by incorporating the recommendations we are providing. We want the proposed Accessible Canada Act to receive royal assent in this current Parliament no later than spring 2019. So I'd like to turn it over to my colleague Bill, who will go through highlights of our recommendations.
Thank you, Jane, and thank you, committee members, for your attention, especially at this late hour. I want to be clear that my comments are only highlights of the 12 detailed recommendations that can be found in the packages that have been distributed. I will walk through each of the 12 recommendations to provide a highlight of each one. Number one, creating a culture of inclusion and equity is key to the success of the legislation. So we recommend that all people employed by the federal public sector, including parliamentarians and their staff, must engage in an intensive awareness and education program. Why? This will ensure everyone understands and is able to demonstrate inclusive attitudes and equitable practices that promote access and inclusion. Number two, change the terminology of, quote, Canadians with disabilities, quote, to read, quote, people in Canada with disabilities. Why? The legislation should include landed immigrants and others who do not hold Canadian citizenship. Number three, funding will make or break this legislation, so make it available. people with disabilities and their organizations should be properly compensated. Why? Too often, people with disabilities and organizations are asked to contribute disability expertise with no financial compensation. No other experts are asked to work for free. Number 4, an effective complaints management system must be in place to respond to and resolve complaints. Why? The system must support complainants, prevent compliance disputes between regulated agencies and departments, and ensure that complaints are resolved quickly. Number 5, Indigenous peoples are not explicitly in or out of Bill C-81. Give clarity regarding First Nations communities and their requirement for compliance with the Accessible Canada Act, or under First Nations specific accessibility legislation as requested by the Assembly of First Nations. Why? Indigenous peoples with disabilities need to know if this legislation will promote access and inclusion for them. Number 6, expand compliance with standards and regulations beyond federal jurisdiction. The Government of Canada must promote compliance and in some situations require compliance from funding recipients. Why? It's a natural extension to expect entities that receive funding from the Government of Canada to comply with the Accessible Canada Act. Number 7, support people with disabilities who experience multiple barriers and intersecting forms of discrimination and marginalization. Why? Access and inclusion requires reaching the most marginalized people in our communities and workplaces. If we don't reach the people who need this legislation the most, then we have failed. Number 8, put people with disabilities in the fabric of the Act. Ensure that the CASDO staff, the board, and committees includes a minimum of 2/3 of people with disabilities. Why? People with disabilities need to be represented in all aspects of the legislation. This honors the principle, nothing about us without us, and provides employment opportunities. Number 9, access to communication accommodations and supports is a cornerstone to inclusion and must be mandatory. Why? This change will enable people with communication disabilities and people who are deaf to fully participate in ways others take for granted. Number 10, don't delay. All standards and regulations should be implemented within 5 years. Why? Setting target dates for performance will increase tangible changes in a shorter period of time. Number 11, the 6 targeted barrier areas, change them to 7. Add communication, as it is a significant barrier for many people across a broad range of disabilities. Why? This change will bring focus to barriers, accommodations, and supports for people with communication disabilities and for people who are deaf, thereby opening doors to participation. Number 12, SL, LSQ are the official languages of the deaf community, so recognize this fact in the Accessible Canada Act. Why? This recognition is of cultural significance to the deaf community, and it will increase full participation by people who are deaf. In closing, our community is paying attention like we have never done so before. We are counting on you to make changes that will have a significant impact on our lives. This is a huge responsibility. We've opened up, we've advised, we've taken a lot of time to present the right recommendations. Listen to us. This is your opportunity to be the change. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thanks to all of you for your opening remarks. We're going to get right into questions from members, and starting us off, MP Barlow for 6 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and I find it nice that you're thanking us for being here at this late hour, but really, honestly, thank you for taking time out of your schedules to be here to help us get this bill through as quickly as possible, and that is certainly a common theme. But the other common theme that I've heard from many stakeholders, and including just about all of you here this evening, is the concern with the lack of timelines in this bill. And we've talked a lot over the last few weeks, and the fact that when this bill is passed through the House and given royal assent, nothing happens. And I think we've heard from stakeholders that it's imperative that there are some sort of timelines in here. There aren't even timelines when the commissioner or compliance office or even the CASDO board should be in place. And I know Mr. Faulkner and Mr. Adair, you talked about that 5 years. Can you give me why 5 years? Is that something that you've experienced in Manitoba? Is there a reason around that number? Is that something that has been proven in the past?
Well, again, in Manitoba, the Act commits the government to making substantial progress towards full accessibility within 10 years. So the 5 years, we're halfway through that now. One would expect that there would have been significant progress, or at least the foundation for that laid. So the 5 years doesn't really come from me in terms of looking at it. The issue regarding having, our experience in Manitoba is that government has dragged its feet. The past government, which was an NDP government, the current government, which is a PC government, so we're not partisan. We're quite happy to be critical of any of the governments of responsibility, have not, and in most cases have been quite defensive and obstinate in terms of trying to find a way to be able to help them make more progress, which is kind of where the issue that's been raised in some of the ones has been the extent to which our experience doesn't provide us with great faith that government is the best stakeholder to hold Parliament to account for progress. And so I guess one of the things that we've mentioned, and it's mentioned in both the brief by AOD Alliance, is the issue of vesting final control in Parliament, not in government. And our experience has been both governments have not been particularly forthcoming in that. So I can't answer the 5-year argument.
But I would in that train of thought, holding Parliament to account, but also to hold those federally regulated businesses to account as well. I think that's another reason that those timelines are imperative.
Well, and again, I think we found that quick progress is important because it is a game-changing legislation, and the longer that games go on as usual, the less likely people take it seriously that there will be a major change that's being placed. So we certainly do encourage quick action. Exactly the timelines for that we have not clarified.
Another concern that has been raised is the fact that there is a bit of a two-tiered, well, not a bit, there is a two-tiered system as part of the bill, whereas government departments can apply for numerous exemptions, whereas federally regulated companies cannot. There are no fines or accountability on the government side, while there are in the private sector. I'm just wondering if and maybe Ms. Butriano, you've been through this. Can you comment on how important I think the message should be that everyone be treated equally, that there isn't, for Canadians with disabilities, that if we're going to enact this, and you've all said how historic this could be if we do it right, how important is that message that everybody be treated equally?
I would agree. It is very important. We gave the longer timeline, if I may, for a second, because a business wanted that timeline, because they said, as a business, we will reinvent ourselves anyway every few years. Otherwise, we won't stay in business. But, it's difficult, and in particular during recessions, et cetera, and we don't want to lay people off. And so they gave me some good arguments. They gave us some good arguments. But we did have standards to be developed every 5 years or less. And we had timelines for standard development. And a very important part of the bill was compliance and enforcement. But because we have not done, and I was part of that government, so I will take the blame as well, we did not do a good enough job on publicly educating people. It would be unfair to find someone if they don't know what they're supposed to be doing. That is why I emphasized a public education budget and support for those processes is very, very important.
Good point.
Like, learn from our challenges and mistakes.
Yeah, for sure. What would be an ideal timeline to have the commissioner in place, the officer in place, and the CASDO board in place at the very least? Anybody can comment on that. I think that would be a first start that isn't included in the bill either. Maybe Mr. Adair, you kind of threw out that 5-year timeline. Maybe.
Thank you. The 5-year timeline, just to mention that before I move to your next question, there's a sense of impatience and there's a sense of urgency for changes to be made. So 5 years for creating the standards and regulations, maybe another 18 months for full implementation. That's part of the detail in the recommendation that we've put forward.
Excellent. Thank you very much. And MP Hogue for 6 minutes, please.
Well, thank you, and thank you again to the witnesses. And I'm hearing that the witnesses this evening and the witnesses who come before us have talked about a sense of excitement, a sense of opportunity, a sense of urgency, and a sense of caution. So we've covered pretty much all of the emotions and the frames that exist there. Following up on MP Barlow's comments, I think there are 3 things that we've heard consistently, and that is the issue of timelines for implementation. What should those be? How would they be handled? The issues of enforcement, transitions, exemptions, accountability, and the reporting process, whether it should be a singular reporting process, whether CASDO should be a singular rather than we should have the CTA and others involved in that. So trying to cut down on the amount of confusion that might exist, and should it ultimately be reporting to the House of Commons, or and therefore be a executive or a member of the House that reports to the House. So those, I think, are the 3 issues that we've continued to hear. Hey, Marie. Hi. Yo, Marie.
Story of my life. That's fine.
Not going any further. Going to Marie.
We only let him out once in a while.
You can see why. Past my bedtime? I will. Hi, Marie. Sorry about that. No, some of your time is gone again. Just with respect to being able to learn, I understand that all cultures are slightly different, but there are some commonalities that exist within the context of government. You talked about the education process. It seems to me that it's a culture we're trying to change. Ultimately, with our set of values we're trying to have reflected within the preamble, within the goals and expectations, and the values I don't think are explicit, but they're inherent within that. Perhaps they should be more explicit. I'm not sure about that. How do you see, in terms of your experience with the education process? You talked a little bit about that, but I'm wondering more about the didactic specific part of that. How do you interpret that into a cultural change rather than a cognitive change?
I think the two go hand in hand. I think a cultural change and a cognitive change go hand in hand. I mean, it's very hard to sit in a classroom, for example, and teach these things abstractly. You have to live them. For example, the project that I've referenced on creating programs and technology for people with disabilities by people with disabilities, well, we hired a gentleman with a visual impairment, actually legally blind, to run that program. We've also hired people with mental health issues in our school. Quite frankly, the biggest obstacle sometimes is HR departments with their rules, unions with their rules, as much as they want to support who they represent. Sometimes they don't want others to get the job without going through the proper process. There are a lot of barriers. I think culturally, we're almost there culturally. I think Canadians are really good people. I've traveled the world talking about this, and we are ahead of many cultures, not all, but we are ahead of many cultures. We have to do it in a way that doesn't threaten, I think, the bottom line of a business, because, again, people with disabilities don't want businesses to close. They just want access to those businesses. So there has to be dialogue at the table of standards development. And in Ontario, and Mr. Adair and I were there together, we had people with disabilities, people from the government, and people from business at each one of these tables. And still, that's, at least until a few months ago, that's the way the development was. Where we are lacking in Ontario is a greater public education strategy. We have isolated parts of excellence. For example, the Pan Am Games, we had a lot of people with the Invictus Games, some of the hiring practices within the public sector in particular. So we're beginning to see a change, and I see the change even in my children that are millennials, talking about their friends with mental health illness, talking about the medication as if it's taking an aspirin. Oh, he forgot his clonazepam, and we had to go back and get it before we went to the party, and things that my generation would never agree or admit to doing, or even knowing people like that. So we've come a long way. But government can certainly do more. I was disappointed that we didn't do more. I remember in 2011, there were a few commercials on TV and on the radio, and that was basically it. And then there were right to the organization's communications, but to the general public, not as much. I also do think that we each have a responsibility. It's not just up to government. And so that is why, at least, we're trying to walk the talk at Ryerson University. We have a very strong equity, diversity, and inclusion department that we've grown in the last few years. But we've also not hired a professor that's Indigenous in the last 3 years. We haven't, even though it's in our plan to do so. So, again, even well-intentioned, I'm just saying, even well-intentioned
The only reason I'm interrupting you because they're telling me I've only got 30 seconds
Oh,
left.
I'm sorry, sir.
I want to go over my new buddy Patrick here quickly.
Okay. Sorry.
Patrick, you were, hopefully we get, yo, Patrick. Okay, sorry, quickly. So just talking about the notion of no compliance framework and the issues of a framework around that, we talked about the principles of progressive realization. And so with deadlines and deadlines that we're clearly the experience to have are not being able to meet some of those deadlines. So how do we put deadlines in and then allow for compliance around that, and the notion of progressive realization, which is as we have the changes happening technologically and changes in terms of realization of culture, that we're able to modify and change so we don't have to go back and do the legislation again, but it can be evolving. And the minister said she wanted to have things happen quickly. She said we've got to start. We've got to start now and make that principle, put the stake in the ground and then build from there. How do you see that happening?
Very brief answer, please. We're over time.
I was sharing
I guess that's not going to be suitable. I'm not sure I can answer the question. Perhaps I can try to sort of rephrase some of or at least the issue of education becomes vitally important. Our view is that most people want to do, the vast majority of businesses want to do what's right. They simply don't know. In most cases, they don't know about disabilities as something they're not familiar with. They don't know how to do things. The standards provides clarity as to how rights, which are already been enshrined in the Charter and human rights codes, can be actively put in place. Knowing about that, back to the Manitoba example, there's a compliance deadline for the customer service standard, which is the first one they did in Ontario, an educational standard. How do you provide dignified equality of service to persons with disabilities? What a great idea, great starting point. Recognize I'll finish in 30 seconds at most.
No, we'll have to come back, I'm afraid. Sorry. We got to
10 seconds?
10 seconds, go.
Okay. In Manitoba, the deadline for 35,000 organizations was November 1st, 2018. That's actually in a month from now. Our province started promoting it, awareness and tools, in September, 2 months ago.
Thank you.
That's not the way to be able to find compliance.
Thank you. MP Hardcastle, please.
Thank you very much. It is true we have recurring themes, so I'm going to try and use my time and talk about things that are a little bit different and intriguing. But first, I just want to say and see if there's a quick comment about it. This, my colleague mentioned progressive realization. That's an actual legal term that is used in UN treaty that is used for coming into force effect. So we can very well put timelines in and understand that they are progressive. I just wanted to clarify that because I think sometimes the term is being used colloquially here, and we do have legal examples of how this is done in treaty language. So having said that, I guess what I'd like to hear, now that all of us have heard each other's comments, I'm really interested to hear more with regards to how we can be maximizing or leveraging existing frameworks, existing regulatory frameworks. I think it was Ms. Deforget who mentioned using the Canada Standards Association. We also have, very briefly, we had heard from the Public Service Alliance about components of the Employment Equity Act. And I just wondered if anyone else in their experience now can see opportunities where we should be using some clarity so that we can be leveraging existing frameworks, existing regulatory frameworks.
Can I speak to that briefly? I think one of the beauties of where we are in Canada now is that this is not a national development, this is an international development. So there are frameworks we can learn from. The European Union has been doing a lot of work on accessibility. I think we can kind of pick the best and the ones which are most suitable for Canada. So I think there are extensive frameworks available. Finding ones that are most applicable to Canada and their leading edge, I think, required research. But I think we're not starting from ground zero. I think we're looking at building at success and challenges elsewhere.
Mr. Adair?
Just to add to that, the Federal Accessibility Legislation Alliance created two sets of recommendations, one for Bill C-81 and one for implementation of the Act once it becomes law. And one of our recommendations deals with this very issue around digital and website access, and there is cited in that European Union standard around website design that would be something to look at. So our thinking is that there are standards that can be looked at even before CASDO was created, and if the standards are deemed to be acceptable, let's start implementing them right away. We don't need to necessarily wait. We definitely want to move on setting up the system which will monitor and manage everything. But if there are some easy and quick wins that we could undertake right away, wouldn't that be delightful? One of our partners from Barrier Free Canada, from the national level of that organization, works with the CRA and provided a very clear recommendation on access to websites and information technology and so on. Thank you.
Thank you. And I'd like to also hear a little bit more opinion, maybe Ms. Baudouin or Ms. Desforges, about, do you think that it is good for us to find ways to articulate in the legislation more than just how the board is comprised, 2/3 persons with disabilities? Mr. Adair mentioned about stipulating staff and other supporting roles surrounding the board. What do you think of that?
Oui, donc dans notre mémoire, on en a parlé. J'ai juste
I didn't have time to go into this in my presentation, but the board and the committees have to be composed primarily 51% of people with disabilities. They have to form a majority with some type of functional limitation. We also have to have protected positions for Quebec. We have to ensure that we're representative of people with a wide variety of limitations. And this evening, there's a principle of transparency that has been talked about. People can really look at the work done, see the work that's being done. I don't know if that answers your question. I participated at a meeting with the Transportation Agency of Canada. We talked about CSA and the Standards Committee, and it was raised by several disabled people that we want to participate. We want to participate. We want to be part and parcel. And so in the COFAN brief and in other briefs, we just want to make sure that we're part of the committees and part of the board. Yeah, 51%, yeah, that's a majority, but 2/3, that would be perhaps even better. But I want to ensure that the disabled are involved. I think it's the more disabled people we have working, getting involved in the board, I think I think that we will get this whole accessibility will have more credibility.
And, now over to MP MP Morrissey, please.
Thank you, Chair. My questions are to Madam Dean. Given your experience from the Ontario government, and you referenced that you did seek out or look at legislation in various countries. You referenced a number of countries. It may not be a fair question, but how, from your recollection, does this legislation currently, as it's drafted, compare to initiatives taken in jurisdictions that you examined?
When I studied those jurisdictions, they were not as evolved as they are today. So if you compare those jurisdictions today, they may actually be an improvement on this legislation. Back when I was studying them, it was from their challenges. I don't want to use the word mistakes because they were pioneers. It was Great Britain, Australia, and United States. And they told me, have a timeline, definitely have timelines. In the United States, I basically modeled what we did with the Environmental Protection Agency. They were developing their standards with a long timeline, but every 5 years or less. So we used a different area to model our legislation. Actually, the fact that this legislation, this bill, when enforced, would also include business, albeit only federally regulated business, is an improvement on many jurisdictions around the world. Ontario is trying to enforce this for all businesses, not just regulated by the provincial government, which is part of the challenge. But so we're trying to do more than what this bill is doing in Ontario. So I would say it depends on which jurisdiction you're looking at and what year you're looking at. Back in 2005, I would say this bill is ahead, but now I know some of those jurisdictions have improved.
Okay. Comment. I want members of the panel here to comment on the legislation. It takes an access approach in its legislative intent, more so than a discriminatory approach. Do you feel that's the right approach or emphasis as the bill goes forward? The focus should be primarily on providing access?
Sorry, I don't understand the question. As opposed to?
Well, access, the bill will be tested on ensuring access for people with disabilities, rather than an emphasis on some legislation under the charter is on rights, focus on rights versus access.
From my experience, I think focusing on access is more concrete and therefore more implementable, if that's a word. We have a lot of human rights. I mean, I've got one right here. I was going to cite about the UN Convention on Human Rights, and yet we're so lacking internationally to follow those human rights.
It's the right approach.
So I think this is the right approach.
Okay.
Again, I'm an educational psychologist by training. Sometimes you have to be specific, concrete, with deadlines, with expectations.
I'd like to hear from Mr. Faulkner and.
Sorry, I'm a former politician, so I
That's
talk too
fine.
much.
And then from probably Madame de Forget.
I concur with Marie. I think when you're looking at human rights, the right is to equitable access. That's really what the right is. So in Manitoba, 41% of all complaints to the Human Rights Commission are related to disability discrimination. All of them have their roots in a lack of equitable access. So I think access is the issue. I think it can be phrased within it's a human right, but I think, again, it's concrete, it's real, it's what the issue is. So I do think that the focus on access is indeed entirely proper and effective.
De Forget?
Oui, donc
In Quebec, we have legislation that deals with the disabled So we want to, this legislation looks at the obstacles or the barriers. I don't know the exact difference between the Quebec and federal legislation, but in Quebec, we're quite cautious. I don't know if I could really compare the two pieces of legislation.
More than likely, yeah.
Well, then, if I only got one moment, and I thank you for your candidness, and in some cases blunt description of where the bill is inadequate in your opinion. I mean, that's what the committee is here for. I don't believe that any of your groups had the opportunity to appear before a parliamentary committee in the past to discuss a bill such as this. Would I be correct in that? Yes? So my question is, if you could comment, and we've heard that a bit about stakeholders, that there's no deadline to make Canada fully accessible. So should the goal be to always strive to achieve a more accessible Canada or to achieve a static accessibility goal? Probably from Mr. Falconer and Mr. Adair.
We dealt with the issue. There's a view that no matter that the understanding of disability and accessibility will evolve through time. You will never be at 100%. Never. Instrumentally and aspirationally, does it help to have a goal that you get 95% to? I am firmly convinced that it does. One has to be careful that one does not drink the Kool-Aid to say that's 100% and don't worry, there'll be no problems. But the reality of having a goal that you can get nearly to and having a timeline to it, I think, is strong effect on the effectiveness of a bill.
I'm afraid I'm going to have to cut in. Maybe one of your colleagues may share some time here. Mr. Rumi, please.
Oh, I don't share well.
Well, you...
Maybe I'll see. Thank you all very much for coming in, your presentations. I wanted to start with Marie, and I'm not sure if I heard you correctly in your presentation, but did you say that the Ontario government put a freeze on the AODA?
Well, when Premier Ford first got elected, basically there was a freeze on a lot of things, and there was a freeze on the meetings for the standards development. These standard development committees have been meeting since the AODA has been lost since 2005, but now they have unfrozen, so they are beginning to work on one of the standards. And his office did reach out, and they did want to talk to me. So I'm very hopeful. I'm very hopeful.
You're hopeful of?
I'm hopeful that the standards development will continue as planned, and perhaps even better, because he's also Minister Cho is also the Minister of Seniors. And if we're lucky enough to get old, we'll all have a disability. So I think having that together with disabilities was a good move on Premier Ford.
I'm just finding it interesting that the provincial government froze, that they had the ability to just say, okay, we're going to stop all that right now. And that's I find that a little disconcerting.
But you have to consider that they did that for everything. Yeah, everything was frozen. So I think actually the standards development committees have been reenacted now, and a lot of other things are still frozen. So I'm feeling pretty optimistic that this is a priority for this government.
Okay, thank you, Patrick. Mr. Falconer, you're actually very, very strong in your words about it's been a failure. I'd like to know if you can give us a little bit more. That timeline of when this all started and how it's like, has anything been accomplished, or is it because it's a failure? See, sometimes when we put a timeline on something and we don't hit that timeline, it's a failure. That's the way that some people look at it. But have we made progress to it? So I just want to, if you can take us through that.
If I could kind of, I don't think I used the word failure. I'll look through my notes. I think I said disappointment. And disappointment is perhaps a subtle, nuanced difference from failure. I don't think it's a failure. I think a lot of good things have happened. Expectations were real. The commitments made by all parties, and I don't say that this was done as a feel-good exercise. Everyone wanted to get stuff done. The reality of the day is that disabilities have not been at the top of government priorities for a long time. And the reason for that, among other reasons, is because the disability community is not well-resourced. It's not like labor. It's not like business. It doesn't have champions of advocates. It doesn't have lobbyists. It doesn't have that kind of power. And so there's a natural tendency for people to say, let's do what's right. And then once the pressure's off, to be able to find that, well, maybe we could find a way to be able to act on other priorities before we act on this priority that we made commitments to. So I don't think the word's failure. I think we have had clear and unequivocal commitments made. Those commitments have not been met. There's movement towards them, and I think every time that happens, we provide commendation and support for that. But the reality is it's moved much more slowly than was ever contemplated when the Act was passed in 2013. Part of that is back to the issue of enabling language and not a lot of can, very few shells. So how can a government choose to move back setting up committees? There's no requirement. They must do this. They can do this. And when you have that kind of latitude, sometimes when it's not a high priority, you don't follow through on what you have promised to do and what you know is the right thing to do.
Now, you had said that there was a 10-year timeline that was implemented?
Not our suggestion, but yes, there was.
But a 10-year timeline, and
Yes.
you're at the halfway point.
We're at the halfway point of that.
And if you were to just gauge where you are in relation to achieving your 10-year targets, where would you say you are?
If I had a number, I'd say 20% there.
20%. So let me ask you this question then, and I guess it comes to, are you seeing momentum? Because once you start to get that cultural change, which Marie was talking about, then things start to pick up. So when we look at our federal regulated agencies, such as the airports, for instance, what we heard from a lot of those agencies is that they're way ahead of the ball game in relation to certain standards because they've taken it upon themselves. So I'm just trying to understand why the difference. Is it a financial thing? Is it that mindset that because there was a 10-year time limit that people said, well, I got time. We got time to get there.
I say this, advisedly. Again, I didn't use the word failure. I think champions are really important, and I hope that all of you will be champions of this bill as it goes into third reading. Marie was a champion in Ontario. We had a champion the minister introduced the bill. There was a leadership difficulties with the NDP, and she left cabinet, and the leadership from the government at the time, the NDP government, was lost. I don't think we currently have a champion in our current government who is pushing this. And the idea of having a real champion, and the other issue is you've had a change in administration from a Liberal Party for 20 years to another party who, 15 years, who might have less of a ideological disposition towards regulation. Similarly in Manitoba, we went from an NDP government to a PC government. So the issue of having legislation that is durable and that is impactful and strong across governments, to me, becomes critical, and that's the issue of having prescriptive, not enabling language and timelines that last beyond current governments.
Thank you very much. MP Folk, please.
Hi, thank you all for being here today. One of the first question, I want to follow up on MP Rumi's statement about recently in Ontario and having things frozen and that type of thing. Was that, so the standards were frozen?
The committees that were developing standards, they were told, don't meet yet. So and it wasn't for very long. The freeze wasn't for very long.
But my question is, so how long have these standards been in the making of being developed?
15 years.
15 years.
Well, 13 years. 13 years. 13 years, yeah.
That seems like a long time.
Well, there are quite a few standards, and it does take a long time, and there are a lot of people around the table. Yes, and there is some frustration about how long it's taking, absolutely. But they are being developed. They are being developed. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. My next question, I want to ask Neil. I just wanted to pick your brain. Was your organization consulted prior to this bill being drafted?
Yeah, we actually, for the last 2 years, we've worked with in contacting First Nations across Canada. We were part of many meetings with the ministers that have held the portfolio and given our recommendations quite a bit, and work with the Assembly of First Nations, as I said. So we have been involved.
correct me if I'm wrong, one of the recommendations, I couldn't remember if it was Mr. Adair or yourself who had mentioned having Indigenous people mentioned in the bill. Am I? We both did. Okay. And to since they're not, from what I understand. So, how would you like to see that put in the bill?
Well, we'd like to make sure that First Nations are covered under the bill or under the distinct First Nations legislation that the AFN has requested from the government. We don't have any indication from the government how this will be, and through our meetings with them, as I indicated, they said that they were going to engage into a nation-to-nation consultation process to see at what level the legislation would be applicable, if at all. So our fear is, of course, that it will not be applicable and things will not change.
Were you given a timeline of when these discussions would happen?
Tentative, but they change. And as I said, as of today, I spoke to the AFN today as well, and there's been no movement yet. And the AFN is willing to work with government, looking forward to the process. And I understand that there's different levels and bureaucracy the government has to go through. But we're getting pretty late into the process now. So the future is not clear, and I think that clarity is needed.
Did you have anything to add to that? No? Okay.
He's my teacher.
Perfect. I guess another question I wanted to ask would be about public education. So I know I've heard a lot about public education, and just wondering what would be sufficient, or what would look like a good head start. I know this is a different topic, but even with the legalization of marijuana, I expected that there would be more public education before that had happened and rolled out, which there was not. So what would be sufficient for this bill in regards to public education?
Bill, go ahead.
Just to start off, public education is an area, recommendation that Federal Accessibility Legislation Alliance put forward as well. And so this is representing 56 organizations across the country. One of the things we're calling for is a change in attitudes. And how you change attitudes is there's a body of knowledge around what works and what does not work. And this body of knowledge needs to be applied in terms of the public education as well as the education of employers and people who are responsible for implementing standards and regulations. One of the best ways to change attitudes is to provide an opportunity where people work together, either voluntarily or on a work assignment, in an employment situation, a disabled person and a non-disabled person, and they get to know each other. The barriers disappear, and they just become people. So that is one of the foundations for why we're arguing for 2/3 representation in the staff, in the committees, and on the boards, because that rubbing shoulders actually translates into changing attitudes. And how we do that with the general public is a challenge, but it can be achieved. It's a matter of having smart people work on it.
I can speak from the post-secondary education point of view, and having people with disabilities be the professors teaching these topics, and teaching any topic, quite frankly, but particularly teaching these topics. I think that's what we are doing, and it's incredibly enlightening for people, for the students, for the adult students.
Thank you.
There always are learning opportunities. And so I'll just very quickly, when the first AMA was being passed in Manitoba, there was a standing committee like this. It's an earlier bill. And we knew many people were coming who were going to require accommodation supports or accommodations, communication accommodations. And so I would have spoke to the clerk at the Legislative Assembly, and I would have asked, are you arranging these things? And the person said, without missing a beat, we don't have those fancy things here. Well, that was a moment to be able to say, participation in the democratic process is a right of citizenship. And this is something that is not a fancy thing. This is something which is a basic right of citizenship. And that person will never, ever say that again. And it wasn't a rebuke. It was just saying, you really have to really think this through differently. And I think those learning opportunities become really, really important.
Thank you. Back to MP Rumi, please.
Turn. I'm back. I want to come back to Mr. Falconer, because again, when we're trying to understand where we've been trying to go, and so I'll correct the record. You didn't say failure. I understood something differently, but great disappointment with a 10-year timeline. And you mentioned that you felt part of the reason why was there wasn't a champion for that. Governments will come and go, and maybe you get one champion, and then the next government comes along, you don't have a champion. So would you say that creating a framework with CASDO, would you see them as being the champion? Because they're the ones who are creating that framework. They're the ones who are putting things into place. Would you see them as being a champion?
I think they can be. I think they can be a more effective champion if they report to Parliament and don't report to the government. So that would be one area regarding some independence. I think I would have dismissed some of the discussions regarding having timelines and having requirement languages that required action. 10 years ago, I would have said, well, we don't need those kind of things. But the reality is we are now much more able to advocate for government to fulfill its obligations when we have real obligations for them to fulfill than when it's a matter of permissive and we're doing the best we can and we're making progressive realization. It's better now than it was 5 years ago. To actually have hard deliverables gives us the opportunity as a community to be able to say, this is what you promised, this is what's required, we need you to be making stronger efforts. So I think also allowing the community to be a champion is important, and part of that is by having requirements and timelines.
So coming to timelines, listening to some of the testimony, I mean, we're not just talking, when we're talking federal built infrastructure, and we look at a lot of the banks and the federally regulated infrastructure, a lot of them are already up to date with ramps and so on and so forth. We heard from the banking system, Royal Bank has already the technology that you can go to the machine, it'll talk to you, right? But then we started hearing about a whole different range. When we're talking about disability, we're no longer just talking about somebody in a wheelchair. We're no longer just talking about somebody who physically is disabled, but has speech and hearing and vision. But technology is changing so rapidly. The fear is putting something on a hard timeline. Would that take away from the innovation? So again, looking at some of the federally regulated departments, a lot of them are on the cutting edge, such as airports. So, Vancouver Airport, International Airport. I had coming back from a trip, and I saw about 20 people in a wheelchair, and they were all wandering around. And I went and I asked them, "What are you guys doing?" And they were actually employees, and they were going through their training, right? Which is fantastic, but you're not mandating that. Somebody said, we need to figure this part out. We need to be able to think like our customers that are coming in, and how are they accessing and the services that are around there. So that wasn't mandated. That wasn't legislated. That is going beyond. So how do we capture that and not put that in a legislation? Because you'll never get that in a legislation, I don't think. Marie.
I can talk about the AODA. The standards are reviewed every few years and updated. And it's not just the customers coming in, it's, as you mentioned, it's also employees. And some people may not know, through lack of education, the real cost of accommodating an employee, but the average cost is only $500. It's not very expensive to have an accommodation for someone with a disability to work anywhere. Of course, there's some there's more, some that are less, but it's $500 average isn't very much. And what that does to the education and the culture of the rest of the office or wherever they're working is an incredible gain. So I think having reviews, in fact, it was the Employment Standard Review that is now unfrozen, and so we'll get on with it. But it's a 2011 standard. So if there are innovations, and there certainly have been innovations every day in technology, they can be addressed through the reviews.
I agree. It's a matter of what those timelines are based on what. I'm going to share the rest of my time with Mr. Harvey.
Yes, less than a minute. We will have time. We will have. It's very generous of you. We will likely have time for an additional mini round. So, Mr. Harvey, if you have a brief question, or maybe Bobby has a follow-up.
Yes, I'd like for Mr. Adair to speak. Yeah, Mr. Adair, to speak on where we got cut off earlier.
Remind me.
Oh, okay. If you've slipped a bit,
I think it was about
accessibility versus rights, but I'll leave that.
Yes,
because
I can speak to
Very
that.
briefly,
Very
please.
briefly.
I have two questions.
Access and inclusion is really vital. That's where it's at. So I would add inclusion to the work that's underway with the Act. The access and the inclusion opens all kinds of possibilities. Okay. Done.
That's it. You're done. Oh.
See what I gave to you?
Yeah.
MP Diot, please.
Yeah, this would be to Mr. Belanger. You said that the C-81 will impact First Nations substantially, so substantial resources must be allotted to the First Nations. Can you give me any idea of what that looks like? And do you have a dollar figure? Do you have...
I don't, but it'll be significant, I would imagine.
So what is significant? And what does it look like then? What kind of resources?
So I would say that the majority of the resources that will be necessary are to the built environment, the physical environment, when it comes to roads, housing, accessible buildings, that type of thing, and then a review of the policies. But it'll be millions upon millions of dollars to look at all communities in Canada.
Are you especially concerned about northern communities, isolated communities?
All communities. Some communities will be very accessible, some will not. But a review of all communities would be necessary. Northern communities, isolated communities, certainly they'll have some of the higher rates of inaccessible buildings, communities, infrastructure, housing, roads, that type of thing. But we've worked in urban communities where accessibility is a huge problem as well. So it takes a committed effort from the government to actually work with these communities individually and to look at their issues that they have. But it's going to be a significant amount of money to make communities accessible in Canada.
So do you think any of this should go forward until we can review what's needed?
Well, absolutely, the legislation should go forward, but there has to be the First Nations component as well, and the government needs to work with the AFN and First Nations communities to ensure that their voice is heard, and not only from the leadership, but from those individuals living with disabilities in those communities. They have to bring their voice to the table as well. And when like I said, we would have hoped that this would have been farther along, but as long as it's going to progress, that's the key thing. If for some reason First Nations were now exempt from the legislation or a distinct First Nation legislation, in our opinion, from our organization, that would be a huge mistake.
Okay, thank you. How much time do I have?
2 minutes and 35 seconds.
Okay, perfect. This is to Ms. Deforge. You talked about needing a clause on social integration. And companies, I'm just reading my handwriting here, companies need to be awarded or rewarded for inclusion. What does that look like in your mind?
That's an example that I gave. including social integration clauses, we would be able to go even further and give advantages to companies that hire disabled people, because our brief focuses on the fact that the federal government should have this reflex of benefiting these companies. We should have this reflex. So that's an example, one of many, where the federal funding, whether it be used for the public or private issues, should be associated with this type of responsibility. I don't know if I've answered your question properly.
I'm wondering, are you saying, for instance, that there should be a mandated number of on the number of disabled people hired at these?
En fait, c'est plus quand il y a un appel d'offres, quand il y a deux.
When there's a request for tender, let's two companies are bidding, perhaps more points should be given to the company that hires a lot more disabled people.
Mr. Falconer, I just jotted down some words: convoluted bill, more chasing of tails. The bill is deeply flawed. You use words like shocking. What do we have to do?
Well, I think there are, I think I said that we are strongly supporting, there are 97 recommendations made by the AOD Alliance in their draft. The ARCH, these are really skilled assessors of legislation, and I think what they have to offer are tremendously important. If I had to give you 7 that I think would be really important among them, I think I would probably go back to, say, the issue of looking at timelines and a grand goal. I think the idea of ensuring that the government has a duty to enact and it's not permissive language. I think the idea of consolidating power in one structure rather than distributed between the CRTC and the CTA and trying to have a maze. I think of Occam's razor, the issue of making things simple rather than complex. It's a 103-page bill. Probably the greatest definition of inaccessible bill is that I've seen for a long time. I think the idea of making sure that there is oversight that is independent of government is probably very important. I think the idea of speeding up requirements for reviews. There's a review that will happen 5 years after the first regulation. No, it should be 5 years after it's enacted. So you have that kind of regulation. I think the idea of looking at addressing the needs of and rights of Indigenous people is critical. How that happens and what timelines, it can't be, well, it's an afterthought. It's got to be a forethought. I think the idea of ensuring that it's clear that the strongest accessibility law prevails, which doesn't say that in the bill right now. And I think the idea of requiring that no public money be used that's going to perpetuate or exacerbate or create new barriers is very important as well. So if I was to sort of look at ones I think among the 97 that have been made by the Alliance that I think are critically important, I would probably highlight those.
Thank you very much.
Thanks very much.
MP Hardcastle for 3 minutes, please.
Thank you. This is really intriguing. So I'd like to hear all of you comment a little bit more. I don't know if everyone on our committee grasps when we're going to be going through clause by clause and doing amendments. Just picture how you're helping us advocate for certain amendments. So moving from language that is permissive or enabling to language that is prescriptive is something that I'm concerned about. Right now, there is in the Accessibility Act the need or the requirement that everybody have an implementation plan, but there's no requirement that you implement your implementation plan. So that's an example. I wonder if, just as Mr. Falconer had kind of given us some low-hanging fruit, if any of you have some observations with relation to that.
Would just simply agree that it has to be, compliance and enforcement have to be important aspects of the bill. I do know that tomorrow morning you'll be hearing from David Lepofsky, who was a major force in the AODA development, and his brief. I saw some of his notes. I think will guide you even more specifically.
Anybody else? One of the other things that was mentioned in terms of implementation and enforcement is this idea of fragmentation. And you know, right now, we are going to have an accessibility commissioner that's mandated to oversee all of the accessibility plan requirements. But we also have the Canadian Transportation Agency and the CRTC, the Radio and Telecommunications Commission. They're going to be in charge of themselves. Do any of you see that as problematic? Should we just make the Accessibility Commissioner solely responsible for that? Or do you think that this is a good way to go? Some observations, please.
Speak on that, please.
If we can let Ms. Baudouin.
There are a lot of things in the bill that are not consistent. There have been recommendations made that complaints should be made directly to the commissioner because the offices don't necessarily deal with complaints the same way. It varies a great deal from one agency to the next. And sometimes the process is very long. We need to simplify the process. I fully agree with that. As for accessibility plans, in Quebec, we have an organization called the Office of Disabled in Quebec, and they promote action plans through the municipalities or the departments with towns of 15,000 people and more. But these action plans don't go anywhere. There's no teeth to them. There's very little follow-up. All people do is look and see whether the act's being enforced, and that's it. I can tell you that I have a lot of concerns with respect to these accessibility plans. Who's going to do the plans? How about consulting the disabled? I don't think it's a good idea to do this. I think you have to think of another idea. There are some initiatives that come from the community, and these community initiatives should be looked at. I think you need to work with the disabled and people who use the services. When you talk of federal infrastructure, such as, housing, there's billions that are being invested in this. Could you promote accessibility in housing throughout all provinces? We have an aging population, and more now, people are looking for accessible housing at an affordable cost. So that's another issue that needs some attention. With respect to infrastructure, there are other bills that are involved, and they need to focus on accessibility. Thank you.
End of 2 rounds. We do have enough remaining time that we can do a bit of a mini round, maybe 5 minutes per, if everyone's okay with that. All right, and we'll start over with you. Who would like to go? John? Yeah. Go ahead, Mr. Barlow.
Thanks very much, Mr. Chair, and again, thanks for everybody for hanging in. For Mr. Belanger, this is not a question I was planning on asking, but just came up from your testimony. Is you were consulted for 2 years on this bill, and yet you've addressed there are significant issues that will impact First Nations in perhaps millions of dollars, and yet those issues are not even mentioned anywhere in this bill. Just a question, what are your thoughts on the consultation with First Nations and how it's included in Bill C-81?
Well, the consultation process, the government contracted with the Assembly of First Nations. They contracted with us, with National Native Women's Association of Canada. So consultations were done.
They're There's nothing included in the
They're
bill.
not there, and when I say millions, it's, I'm talking any hundreds of millions, not just millions in the tens. So how do I feel about that? I think that if the government is going to be true to their commitment to do a nation-to-nation consultation, and that's going to be a good thing. But how that unfolds and how communities are participating, there's 634 communities. How the government's going to engage them is going to be an indicator of how legitimate the government's priority the First Nations in Canada are when it comes to this legislation. So we'll have to see how it goes from here.
Thank you. And just another question that hasn't come up today. The minister had mentioned, and I think I appreciate everybody's comments on the fact that timelines, and the minister said that the reason they don't have timelines in there is because on standards, the standards are going to change as we go. But I love the fact that you've said, absolutely, that's the case. But if you don't have somewhere to start, you can't get any accountability there. But the other one was that she had mentioned that any of the fines or anything from those would be just going into general revenue. And our feeling is that an amendment in there that those fines would go to some sort of fund that would fund accessibility programs. Is that something that you would support? And just a quick answer maybe from everyone.
I'd like to say yes, but I've been in politics, and we don't want that to be it. In other words, okay, you've got this fund, go away. This is enough. And things happen in politics, as you all know better than I do probably now. Yeah. So I would say that's not a bad idea, but just let's be careful that doesn't end up being the fund.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay. And I'll split my time with Ms. Falk.
Did you have something? Did you want to follow up?
One doesn't want to have, was there enough fines this year to be able to enable something that is
For
adequate? Doesn't seem to be the test of adequacy. But I think the idea of it being used for special purposes, assuming that there are enough resources in the absence of that, is a very good idea.
I want to touch on the Indigenous people again. I know you had mentioned in your opening remarks advocating for 2/3 representation on CASDO, but also having Indigenous people represented. Is there like a specific number or a specific, number that you or your organization would like to see represented on the board?
Well, we haven't gone to that detail. I think there's 11 positions on the board. Is that correct? I believe that's what it is, 11.
Could be.
So we would expect that one of those positions, at least one, would be designated for an Indigenous person living with a disability. And then the committees as well, that they'd have representation there as well. Well, how many that would be and from the committees and that kind of thing, I'm not sure.
Okay. And then one quick question. The past couple days, I've heard a lot about plain language for people with intellectual disabilities. So if you can quickly make remarks, is that reflected in legislation that's already out there provincially? Is plain language reflected in those? Yeah.
I would say no, it's not.
Okay.
There's a summary that's a bit helpful, but I don't think it meets the test of plain language.
Okay. And what about in Quebec? No?
No.
Okay.
If I could just add to that, plain language is a form of access and a way of including people.
Right.
So it's something that is required. Federal Accessibility Legislation Alliance did work with one of our partners, People First of Canada, and wrote a plain language version, interpretation, or explanation of Bill C-81. It was tested with consumers who would read it for reliability, and that's the kind of work that needs to be done in promoting awareness of the Act, as well as in educating people about the rights that they have, people with disabilities, the rights that they have once the Act becomes law.
Thank you very
Sure.
much.
Thank you.
MP Morrissey, please, 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. I believe I'm sharing my time with my colleague. There's been a lot of focus on the cost to implement the bill. But if those investments are made, what is the economic gain to people with disabilities? Could you just quickly?
Well, that was one of the factors that allowed the AODA in Ontario to be passed unanimously, because the official opposition, the Conservatives, were concerned about price. But when we showed them the research from jurisdictions that had much more accessibility, United States being one, the tax revenues increased by the billions in the United States simply by making hotels and restaurants accessible to people. Just those two things, just those two types of accessibility brought billions in extra revenues. So yes, it is a cost, but the businesses told me, big and small, that they have to update anyway every 5 or 10 years to keep their business viable. So as long as they had time, they were able to absorb the costs.
Disabled person.
I'm sorry?
What's the economic gain to the
well, that's a very good question, because we don't know, because as I stated earlier, the unemployment rate is so high amongst people with disabilities that just the fact that they will be, with the employment standards in Ontario, for example, more employed, more employable, simply because people will see their value, will add to the tax base.
Okay.
The Rotman School in Toronto did a really wonderful job looking at the economic benefits of accessibility called Unleashing, I think it's called Unleashing, I can't remember, but it was done back about 10 years ago, and it looked at the economic benefits that come from increased accessibility. They were it was, I think, a really well done methodology, and I think was very clear. The other thing is, what's the cost of the barriers now? And the costs are extraordinary in terms of what the costs are to decrease productivity, to reliance on social assistance and things of that sort. So the costs are tremendous now. I think the benefits, economic benefits, are really quite important.
One quick last question. Should the focus be on establishing targets to start versus deadlines to finish? Because there's been spoke briefly on 20 years and only a little happened, 15 years and a little happened. Should there be a stronger emphasis on putting targets to start?
I can only speak for Ontario. Because of these standards being developed 5 years or less, we felt we addressed that in the bill. That is how we address that in the bill. In fact, it was our colleagues in Great Britain that recommended that we do that, as well as in the United States. They were ahead of us, and they were ahead of Canada in Ontario, but they found that when their deadline came, especially in Great Britain, the day before their deadline, everyone was saying, what are we supposed to do? So that's when they said, have standards developed along the way and enforced.
Okay. Mr. Rumi. I got no time.
Goes around, comes around. I want to jump to Mr. Adair. You mentioned, and you're not the only person to mention, communications as a pillar, and it's not, when we're talking timelines, it's not anybody's opposed to timelines. It's trying to understand what they would be referring to. Is it a deadline? Is it a timeline? Is it is it a benchmark? But I want to bring it back to the communication, because you mentioned there's so many things in communication that how would you even apply a timeline to communications? Because there's a lot that you mentioned there. So if you can maybe just talk about that, that would be great.
Well, I think in just the general theme of what we're talking about, I think it's important to have some quick wins and to have some long-haul objectives, and to recognize that we'll never really arrive at a fully accessible Canada. When we get there, then there are going to be more challenges. In terms of communication, this is not an area where I'm an expert. We do have partners among our 56 partner organizations who are experts in this area. Barbara Collier was a witness here earlier and would be a person who could give you details on that. But
actually did the other person that mentioned communication.
Exactly.
The pillar.
And she would be, along with others, would be the right person to work on answering a question like that and putting timelines in. So it's very complicated, and some will be easier and accomplish more quickly, and some will take longer.
And therein lies the biggest challenge, because when we are talking about this, what we constantly heard was it's an evolution. It's not a destination. is constantly evolving. And with new technology that speaks to better capability for communications, it's constantly evolving. And so when I talk about innovation, that's where I don't want to stifle it. Thank you.
MP Hardcastle for the final 5 minutes.
Thank you. I think I'll expand on my colleague's line of thinking there, or questioning. I don't want to say what he's thinking, but my understanding and what we know about CASDO is that it's going to be on an ongoing basis providing standards. And so what we need is, once a standard has been decided, we need a deadline or a time frame, if you want to call it that, a coming to provision time when the federal government enacts it, or doesn't and provides reason. So maybe just all of you can expand on that and maybe slide in a little bit more about how it's how responsibilities are fragmented right now after enactment does take place. I know that Mr. Adair and Mr. Falconer.
I'll speak mostly the fragmentation issue. I think you've got a patchwork of regulatory authorities that makes it unclear that they will actually have consistent regulation. It's unclear who to complain to. It's possible that they'll have conflicting standards. I think it creates duplication, confusion, and will cost money, and that's where the chasing of tails will happen. Will be lots of people doing the same thing without proper coordination and proper accountability to one source, which in this case would be the commissioner. So I think that's the issue. Around timelines, again, I think the grand timeline's an important one. I think the idea of saying within the first, we say 5 years, that the first standards will have been created. I think the 5-year timeline for the review of the Act is critical, because if things aren't working in the first 5 years, let's figure that out and let's make the changes. Let's not wait for the first regulation and then 5 years. Let's have I would say 4 years. In Manitoba Act, 4 years after the Act was proclaimed and enacted, there was a beginning of a review. I think we need that. This is new. We need to learn from it and correct the course as we go.
Just a comment on the fragmentation. So our organizations largely are grassroots and organizations of people with disabilities. We don't necessarily have the legal expertise to answer the question around should it be 1, should it be 2. What we're calling for is a systematic approach which supports complainants, so gives them the support that they need if they're going to complain. A system where we avoid altercations or disagreements between different authorities, and maybe it's one single source or maybe it's not, and that complaints are resolved quickly, and most importantly that we have a systematic way of supporting and reinforcing people whose rights have been violated in relation to the Act. Don't have the answer, but those are the principles that the folks we've talked to are looking for.
I'm not sure, where's my time, Mr. Chair? Am I
139.
Okay. So in terms of the fragmentation, then it brings us to the matter of exemptions. That not only are we dealing with different departments that are, or different entities that are going to be responsible for the same thing, but there are some entities, there are some organizations under federal jurisdiction that would be exempt. And there is also a concern that there won't be a requirement for a reasoning or a rationale to be provided, or an appeal process for a person living with a disability or someone who's civically engaged. So if we're going to keep these exemptions in, that's a glaring oversight in terms of that kind of accountability. Just some feedback on that.
I don't know enough about the exemptions and why they're there. I do know, and perhaps there's good reasons, I don't know, but I do know from our Ontario's experience that being firm with organizations on having to comply is important. That, and I'm not talking specifically about exemptions, I'm just talking about our experience in Ontario. We need to be firm, otherwise we will not get compliance. But I don't know enough about the exemptions to know why they're there. I don't understand the rationale behind
Okay,
them.
so do I have time for anybody else to?
Very quickly.
Anyone else to comment on that? Okay, well, very quickly, if I could, Mr. Chair, just get on the record when I was giving my explanation of how I thought timelines would fit in with CASDO. I got a thumbs up from Mr. Adair. And can we, like, that he was agreeing with that, with that summary. So with that then, I guess we'll leave it for the next bit of questioning from my colleagues.
Thank you. Thank you very much, everybody, and I really do appreciate, on behalf of the committee, thank you for accommodating our evening schedule here. And we will be continuing this. Just for my committee colleagues, we'll be continuing. Excuse me, the next meeting, first thing tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. in this space. Thank you very much. Adjourned.